And we were like, wow, that smells really weird. And as soon
Yeah.
as I poked my head, I was like, that's why. So like
Yeah.
the smell of it, it was never the smell or the look of it. It was just like, for me, it's always been like, that's a person, but there's not a person in there. We do some human trafficking cases. I've done some other high-end cases when I used to work at the federal level. When I was in the military, I also was utilized whenever we had to do a detention or arrest or something. And when we did ballistics, we checked everything. We checked fingerprints like it was him. He was the guy who was killing our guys. And
Human trafficking, that was the kind of thing that I thought, oh wow, yes, we've got to get Rich on the podcast. Richard, how are you, brother?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for waiting for me. Folks, I was late today. I think it's the first time ever. But, hey ho, families call. And that's the great thing, Rich, isn't it, about podcasting is people are all quite nice and quite understanding if you have to shift things, an hour this way or an hour that way or change the date. It's not like being in the military where you can't change. You're not allowed to change anything.
I mean, you can. You're just going to get NJP'd. Like, that's just it. It's like, at what expense? How much rank are you willing to sacrifice to do this?
Yes.
That's the gamble.
Listen, brother, I want to come and talk about your military career, but can we go straight in? Because I know this will fascinate all people and not just our sort of military buffs, but the human trafficking, that was the kind of thing that I thought, oh, wow, yes, we've got to get Rich on the podcast.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. How do I say this? Well, for everybody that doesn't know me, my name is Ricardo Abdel Aviles. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and actually in Arecibo, Puerto Rico is where I was raised. And then I joined the military in 08. I deployed to Pad Liberty in Baghdad, Iraq in June of 2008. And then I came back to September of 2009. It was there that I had my first encounter with like a child trafficking victim, which we had a kid that was we had some Iraqi police MIPs that were getting shot in the head. And we ended up finding a lot of them, and we started like triangulating. Okay, they're only shooting these two spots, so we got to put security here. We're finding the bodies at this time. And we end up running into this car that the kid didn't want to keep his hands up. And we end up like pegging the car, not pegging the car, I'm sorry. We end up like holding the car, pull out. It's a 16-year-old. And when we did ballistics, we checked everything. We checked fingerprints like it was him. He was the guy who was killing our guys. And he was what's called a child of war, which that's part of like the branch of human trafficking, right? Human trafficking has a lot of components, right? And that was like my first encounter with it. And it was pretty shocking to see like a kid that age that was like that willing to commit. Because when we sat them down and we started talking to him, like he just openly admitted to everything. Fast forward years later, I start my business called Language Ninja Solutions in Springfield, Missouri, and I get a call one night where I was told, "Hey, there's someone on the phone, and we need an interpreter, and we found you on Google, out of all the things." And I was like, "Yeah." And this girl on the line said, "Help me, someone's trying to sell me." And I immediately was like, okay, let's pause right here. You need to call the cops. This is my information because I'm probably, going to be a part of this now, some way, some shape. I was like, they'll probably come take a statement, and then I have to go to court. Me thinking as a cop. You know what I'm saying? You know how sometimes our minds, military guy to military guy, you walk into a room and you kind of know what you're doing, right? Like you're assessing everything. Well, it's the same with me as an interpreter. Is there's a system. We go here, here, here. I know that this leads to this, so I have to stop. And I got a call a couple of weeks later, and it was from a county here in Missouri that will remain nameless for now. They said, we heard that you're an interpreter. We saw your background. You have a background check. You know, they had already like researched me, and they're like, could you come up here? You know, it's an hour drive. We'll pay you this much. And I was like, yeah, sure. And when I walked in, I recognized like the voice, because I heard a voice in Spanish, and like I kind of like froze for a second, and I was like, oh shit, I recognize that voice. And I didn't say anything because as an interpreter, you know, you have to stay neutral, right? Can't show emotions. You have to remain neutral because you're there to do one job, you know? And sure as hell, like they start talking, and it was an interview. They were just interviewing the girl to get her side of the information. And, you know, she's like, oh, I called the church, and the interpreter answered, and da da da. And she told her side, which was that she had ran from the place that she was at. She found a church that she recognized. And lo and behold, they just went on Google and like found me, and they just called, and I so happened to pick up, and I said, hey, we need to stop. Cause at that point I need to let them know, hey, I keep pretty good notes on everything that I do interpreting wise. And I was like, I believe I'm that interpreter, and I can prove it because of this is this. And they were like, well, that shouldn't be a problem. Is that a problem for you? I go, no, that it's not a problem. I'm just letting you know that at some point, you know, if they asked who that was, it was me. Okay. And I can tell you exactly what I said. I have, you know, the notes here. And they were like, okay, no problem. Never was an issue. Fast forward, you know, 3 years, I worked like a couple hundred cases just interpreting for kids and victims of people that were either in sex trafficking, child trafficking. They were victims of child pornography, molestation, human trafficking. And, you know, here we are, 2023, and I'm finally talking about it. So the longest time I couldn't talk about it because there was some of those cases were still open. Some of those cases, you know, I never knew where they went. So it's pretty shocking sometimes, you know, when you think about it and you see like the movie that's out now, I think Sound of Freedom movie, you know, and you see it and you're like, oh, cool. Finally, someone's like having that conversation, you know, from that side. And it's not just Liam Neeson going to fuck somebody up, which it's a great movie. Taken's a great movie. But it's like, hey, the conversation is now being open, you know, especially after the whole Jeffrey Epstein ordeal and everything. People, I think, are a little more like aware of like certain things that happen.
So if you're a Spanish interpreter, what kind of countries were these individuals coming from? Was it all over Latin America?
That's a good question, actually. No one's ever asked that. That's a really good question. The majority of the ones that I had were from Ecuador and Mexico. That's where the majority of the people that I can recount, that I interpreted or translated for, that were trafficking victims, they were from those two countries, Mexico and Ecuador.
And okay, so there's a lot of trafficking of various things, isn't there? From Mexico.
So like what happens is a lot of times is, and people don't understand how common this is, right? What happens a lot of times is that you'll get someone that comes to the States, right? And they go, well, and this is like, by the way, I want to make this very clear. This is one of the many ways that you can get into the country. I'm not saying this is something you should do. I'm not saying that I condone this. I'm just saying that based upon what I've translated and the experiences that I've had, this is one of the many ways that I've heard people tell people and then me interpret how they came in, right? One of the ways is a family member pays for it. They straight up they know who to call. They know someone knows someone that they know what they normally call a coyote. The coyote is a guy that, you know, takes you across the border. What happens a lot of times is that you have to pay a lot of money for security, because for them to get you to the border outside of Mexico is easy. The problem is in a lot of those areas, right? If you go through certain parts, the water is not drinkable because there's just bodies in it. So you don't want to like be out there drinking that river body. And this is like, we had a group of kids, like boys, like a group of boys that they drank from the water, and one of them had some severe like sort of bug disease, and he had like stab wounds also from because he left a gang and whatnot. And then his brother had no issues, but he had a severe allergic reaction to a flu shot, like severe, like and the doctors would say and people would say like, well, maybe it's because of this. But I tell you what, everybody that I know that drank from those rivers of that had bodies in them, they all have some sort of immunological issue, like severe.
Mm.
So you see that, and then people don't understand that that's very common. They'll just pay someone, and a lot of times what happens is, from my experience, I used to interpret when we had that big in 2017, we had like a bunch of people coming through, and they were just throwing the kids over the fence. So what a lot of those kids did was they were paid by a coyote to take them there, and then they memorized an address, and the kids know they can look up an address anywhere, and they get told, hey, if you're here, you go do this, and they'd show up to their parents. That kid just escaped, like that was something that happened a lot because I would be interpreting for someone, and then the kids don't know. The kids a lot of times they don't understand. And I say it in the beginning, everything that is said here from here on out, everything, I have to repeat because by law, I have to like treat this person, which is called an LEP, right? Limited English proficient, right? Or limited English person. Hey, you need to feel comfortable, right? Because you know how it is. How many times you go to a country and people are like, pero mira el moreno, mira esto, mira. And you're like, they're looking at you, but you don't know the culture. Maybe they're looking at you because they're talking about someone over there and they want them to think that it's about you. Like there's a million things that could happen that you don't understand. And it's terrifying. Now, if you had someone that could tell you in your ear everything that's happening around you and everything that they can tell you and process it, like you just saw what we did that exercise, right? Where you said something and I immediately like told you what it was in English. And that was like a pretty slow, it was like a 3.5 second, probably 5 second delay, right? As an interpreter, you have to be less than 2.5 seconds with delay for you to be able to like efficiently work, right?
Mm.
So people don't understand all the dynamics that are in play. And unfortunately, when you have different cultures, you have to like do research. You got to talk to people because there could be some slang or so colloquialism or some sort of linguistic barrier where if they say one thing, it could mean another thing, right? So like that's where you have to be like really careful. But that was part of that was a really good question too. No one's ever asked me that.
Sorry, you said Mexico. Did you say Guatemala was the other country? Or
Ecuador.
Ecuador. Okay.
Ecuador.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Ecuador, right on the equator.
Yeah. Pretty easy. Halfway there.
I guess it's a boat ride across the Pacific to get into Panama or somewhere. And
I mean, I wouldn't know, right? Because I've never done that trek. But let me pull up a map now because now I don't want to sound dumb. Yep, there we go. Da, da, da. I mean, yeah, you could, but then the problem is you could run into the Coast Guard, and you don't want to roll the dice with the military because in a lot of countries the military is pretty corrupt. I mean, not that our military doesn't have its issues, but like a lot of you have to understand one thing, man. Like this is what I tell people, and this is like the hardest thing for people to process. Traffickers don't really see people as people. They see people as cattle. The moment you understand that, you're going to understand how fucked up these people are. And it's going to be a hell of a lot easier for you to look around and go, okay, I can see how that could be exploited or that could be an issue. The thing is that a lot of times, man, like these people don't make it. And guess what happens with those bodies? Not a fucking thing. There's nothing you can do. No one's going to go in between, that I know of. It's a problem that I think that eventually it's going to have to be addressed in between borders because think about it. How many bodies can you stock and can you stock up in a piece of land before it starts to become an issue? You start attracting, and I'm not an entomologist or anything, but like you start attracting certain animals to a certain spot. Like at some point it's going to be an issue. That's one way that I look at it. The other issue is that it's not really like addressed or even spoken about because people think that it only happens at the border. And that's not the case. I mean, here in Missouri, I think a few months ago or a few weeks ago, they found this girl that was trafficked from Texas all the way to St. Louis, Missouri. They found her in a hotel. This was recent, like real fucking recent. So it's like one of those things that it's like what I always tell people, man, is that you have to like really like just look around you. It's not hard to have situational awareness. The problem is I think personally, I don't know if this happens to you or what your thoughts are, but I love to hear it. I think for me, what it is people just are scared of being wrong or are scared of like appearing like, oh, like I'm being like a Karen or something. I think that's one of the issues we have here in America with this.
This sort of situational, it's quite crazy, isn't it? People can be so close to a crime. I mean, you could literally be in a store shoving a television inside your jacket, and the person next to you just is completely oblivious.
Yep.
And then there's the cultural aspect that a lot of people can't imagine a crime because they've never done it. So it's this thing, isn't it? A lot of people judge others based on their own sort of moral values. And
I'll give you a crazy one, Chris. You want to hear a crazy one? I had a doctor one time tell me that only happens in movies. Not a doctor like for like freaking history. No. Like an MD told me, he's like, this doesn't really happen much. This is just in movies. And I was like, it's like, yeah, sure. I guess I'm filming like 72 movies at the same time, but whatever. It's just wild to me, man. Like,
can we? I'm just thinking for our friends at home. Can we get some specifics? Because
yeah,
because then I want to come on to the sort of children issue, which is freaking lots of people out at the moment, and especially the children. If it's what people say it is,
So let me explain to you this, right? So I'll speak for the United States because I don't know about UN law, but I'm 99% sure the UN has laws against this, right? Because it's considered a crime against humanity, actually. So I mean, you have to understand, first of all, human trafficking can be defined as it's the act of recruiting, transporting, trafficking, moving, harboring people by force, coercion, deceitfulness, fraud, abuse of power, position, or to collect some sort of debt, right? So that's what human trafficking can be defined as. What people need to understand is that they'll hear something, right? And they're like, oh my God, this is human trafficking. And it's like, first of all, stop right there. Understand that there's an element of human trafficking, right? There's elements to this, right? Normally I tell people it's three things. It's process, means, purpose with an end game, right? And the reason I say it like that is because if you have the process that someone is recruiting, harboring, keeping someone, moving them, or getting something from them, right? By the means of force, violence, fraud, coercion, manipulation, right? For the purpose of to keep someone in it's two things that you can define. It's either commercial sex acts or labor services, right? Which means basically it's like involuntary servitude, debt bondage, slavery, sex trafficking, CP, like stuff like that. With that equals human trafficking, right? That's the best way that I can explain it. Does that make kind of sense for your people right there?
Yes, exactly. So these individuals that you're coming across, Ecuador and Mexico, did you come across children?
Oh yeah, mainly all my cases were kids.
Yeah, and were they, were they being trafficked for the sex trade or for the false adoption kind of?
I never had anything organ wise, right? Like organ trafficking, which that's a huge thing. I never had that. I never had Oregon, and there was another one. The most cases that I had was commercial sex act, which you're trafficking a minor to in exchange for money in commercial sex act. That was the main one that I had that I ran into.
Are they going to a brothel if that's possible for a little one?
No. That's a great question. That's a good question. Most people wouldn't ask something like this. A lot of times it's, and this might sound shocking to most people, but in my experience, a lot of times it was family members. It was family members to friends.
Mm.
That was it. That was it. They would exchange money. They had a room. They'd go do their thing, and that was it. That was like the majority of it.
Yeah.
Like when it came to kids, there was one that they were trying to sell. I had one that was just crazy. They were trying to sell the kid online, and it was an informant or somebody. I didn't know because I got called in because CPS got called in. So CPS was technically my boss for that period, and I would go in and report. But they were trying to sell the child, and on the dark web, and they ended up contacting a federal agent. And then I had to go in because the CPS got involved and all this other stuff and da da da. And that one was just a mess. Like that mother gave up her rights. Like she ended up giving up her parental rights, which is called a TPR here. It's a termination of parental rights. Like that's when like the court says, no, you should not be a parent for this tiny person. And it takes a lot to do that, man. Like people think sometimes it's hard. Bro, I saw situations where I'm like, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? And then obviously, a lot of times you don't get to see the end of something as an interpreter because it's just it is what it is. You're not part of like the group. That's why I consider interpreters like ninjas, because it's like you're really not part of the group. You're just in the background, and then you get the fuck out. You leave. But yeah, it's wild, man. It's like really crazy. It's like really crazy. And people just the the crazy thing about it is how people try to justify it is what's crazy to me. Like that's what's wild to me. I had a if I could share this one too with you. Um I got called one time to interpret for a child registered sex offender, right? Uh and they found, because they monitor those people, and they had found something on a social media platform that had indicated that this person was trying to like reach out to a kid, or I can't recall the details. They had to go talk to him because they found something on his computer, and I was the interpreter that got called that day. I was like, perfect, let's go. I don't get told anything except he's a registered sex offender. We're going to go talk to him. And as soon as I walk in the room and I identify myself as the interpreter, and I say from here on out, everything that is said, I will interpret. De aquí en adelante, todo lo que se diga, yo lo repetiré. The first thing he says is, I'm not a monster. He said in Spanish, he's like, I'm not a monster. I only get off on people's kids' pictures on Facebook. And it took just everything in me to not just like turn and just like repeatedly slam his fucking head against the table. Because I was like, I just stood there and like my eyes widened. And when I interpret, what I've come to learn is I'll close my eyes, because if I close my eyes, I'm not processing visually. So it helps to process, right? Do you understand and actually I'll ask you this, do you understand the difference between what an interpreter does and what a translator does?
Oh, perhaps you can explain. I've never
Yes,
thought of it
absolutely.
before.
No, absolutely. So a translator translates the written word. He basically grabs something from source A and puts it in source B, right?
And
That's
then
what
the interpreter's got to get the
spoken.
nuances, right?
Spoken. No, the
Yeah.
interpreter is spoken.
Okay.
It's all spoken. But the thing is some people are great translators, but they're horrible interpreters, because you have to understand the brain power of what you're doing. And we found on MRIs, there's studies that they've done where they put someone's brain on like a brain machine that measures activity and how much it lights up. And when they start interpreting, so interpreting basically can go one of two ways. You talk, I talk at the same time in the person's ear. That's called whisper interpreting, right? Or the other way it could be consecutive, is where you talk, I translate, they talk, I translate. You talk, I translate, they talk, right? And then it could be simultaneous, where I'm just talking louder than both of you. This is the best way that I set it up, is I tell people, just talk to me, look at each other, but I'll speak louder than both of you, which is called simultaneous interpretation, right? So when you think about what an interpreter has to do, one of the things that I've come to learn over the years is if I just close my eyes when I'm doing an interpretation and I go like this, people might be weirded out at the beginning, but 4 hours later, I don't have a headache. Because when you're interpreting, you have to listen, process, assimilate, understand, translate, and then say it in another language. And then you do that process all over again for hours. So there's a lot of brain power that's being used. Like when they show you the MRIs, people's whole brain is lighting up. So it's mentally like challenging. On top of you have the stress of the unknown. So that's why I always like to tell people that, because a lot of people, and especially in Europe, interpreters get treated, to my knowledge, interpreters get treated with a lot more respect in Europe than they do here in the United States. Because in the US, people just say, I can just use Google Translate. I'm like, go ahead. When you get sued, let me know. I'll be here.
Yeah, the Facebook thing's interesting. Yeah, I have to ask people, look, you put a picture of my kid on Facebook. Would you take it off, please? And it's not just because I'm in the public eye, albeit, fairly limited, but it's still, you got to take precautions. But it's also like, do they not realize this is a pedo's paradise? There was a program about, I don't want to keep using these words because we'll just get flagged on YouTube, but there's a program about these kind of offenders. Didn't see it myself, but I was at a handover at work and I was chatting to the guy that was coming off shift, and he said, and the subject came up, and he was like, yeah, did you watch that program the other night? He said, these guys are recording. This is the days of VHS video recorders. These guys are recording the Pampers adverts. Right? Pampers being what you guys call diapers, right?
In Spanish, it's pamper, actually. That's interesting.
So I'll say to anyone out there, like, children do not belong on the internet. Doesn't matter if it, what people do with their own children is completely up to them.
But my kids, you don't need to be posting pictures of you dancing and stuff. Like, that's what it is, man. It's just,
people post pictures of their kids in the bath, and you're like, oh no.
Oh, I've never seen that.
And they'll be like, oh, it's just my family. It's just, but just you don't know who in your family is taking that picture and putting it on the dark web. You just don't know.
But here's one even better for you, right? We don't even have to go that far. I'll give you one really easy, right? Here's a really easy one that I learned when I worked in the Army. Do you know how easy it is, like, to get into someone's internet account if they don't have just a VPN? Super simple, by the way. Super simple. People could just be driving by, and I know people who used to do this. They would drive by and they would hack into people's internet, into their Wi-Fi, right? Put up like a fake one, and they would sit out there with a truck that was like a working truck, and then they would just sit out there and get all your saved information. That's how easy it was. And then they would just go on the dark web and sell, like, as a package, hey, I have this person's information. This person's clean. They have a good credit report. Here's their Facebook info. Here's their whole life. So they can just access all your shit.
Yeah.
That's how easy it is. That's how easy it is. Like, easy as hell. Like, Aunt Jemima or whoever, that takes a picture. Yeah, they might post it and stuff like that. And yeah, I don't want that. For me, it's pretty easy. I tell people straight up, like, I don't feel comfortable, posting it. If they want to do it and that's their thing, cool, no problem. Just understand that the next time there's a camera, I'm going to just remove my kid out of the movement. Like, I'm pretty dry when it comes to things like that, because I've unfortunately, I'm past the, oh, you don't think that's possible, to you're just stupid. Like I hate to say it like that, but it's literally how I feel when it's like I have to explain to a grown adult something that is very prevalent, that there's clear examples of it, and you just want to, like, be ignorant. So it's like,
well, this comes back to the naivety thing that we were discussing earlier, isn't it? A lot of people can't, because in their mind they don't commit crimes. That's the yardstick that they use to measure everybody else, I suppose.
Yeah. A lot of people also just don't think that it'll happen. They're like, it won't happen to me.
Are you familiar? You mentioned the UN. Depending on where you do your research, they're getting, like, a bit of a bad rap for it. It's being alleged that the people in these organizations are the people that want to be in conflict zones
Mhm.
so that they can exploit, the small ones. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that, but I will tell you this. You can look up right now what countries are still in favor of child against like child labor laws, right? Which listen, I'm not an attorney. I'm not trying to be an attorney. I just I see this and I look at the numbers and I go, wow, that's shitty. There's countries that they recruit kids to go to war. That is still happening to this day, to this fucking day and age. They'll go in, they'll take the oldest, 15, cool, no problem. You can shoot a gun. And we don't do anything about that. We have the largest movement of trafficking victims or orders for traffic victims in the United States. And we don't do anything about that.
In the UK, we recruit like 8 years old. I think you start in the cadets, and you get all your weapons drills and everything, and make your uniform presentable. And when you get to 15, you apply for the regular service. And as long as your parents sign you off on your 16th birthday, you can join. I know two people that were in the Falklands conflict. They were two of the youngest Marines down there, and I think they was both 16. One of them had to
16,
stay on the ship. The other one didn't know. He was having to pick up. Trying to be careful what I say, but bits of the enemy and put them back together to try to be trying to be. I mean, at 16 years old, I think he was 17 when he was allowed off the ship. You're not even legally an adult till you're 18 in this country. I would
you
say
can't even drink or buy alcohol or smoke.
I'd say you're not an adult until you're probably about 60. So I've got 7 years to go before I make that. I shouldn't be making any decisions for myself.
It's crazy if you think about it too, because like in the States, if your parents sign off, I think you can join at 17. You just have to finish high school and stuff like that, right? But you can go to war. And here's just like one thing that I've always wondered, like, oh, it's like I can go to war, I can lose a limb, but God forbid if I touch a bottle of the sauce. But God forbid if I want to have a cigarette, below the age of 21. God forbid if I want to purchase a home. Like I can sign for millions of dollars of equipment, shoot a motherfucker that I have no idea who he is. I'm just shooting him because he shot me back. Or I have a piece of paper that says this is the bad guy, right? But I can't come home and do blow and get a hooker. Like, obviously I'm exaggerating for effect, but it's like, it's really weird to me. It's always been very weird to me, the priorities that we have. And this is just one of the things, like, I teach a course on this through a company called Transinterpreting. Shameless plug-in. It's a 3-hour course where basically I just sit down and I literally go through scenarios. I go through new information. Like I sent you the information. I have through the time that I've been working with these organizations and people, I've learned like the lingo of it, which in the class I go through the lingo, like what does this emoji mean? What does that emoji mean? What does it mean when you mix these two things? And drugs are super prevalent in all these things, Normally it's like a combo. When you have weapons, drugs, or sex, they're all interconnected, like all of them. So that's one of the things that when people come to the course, I try to tell them, like, listen, like I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the world is all pretty. Like, I'm here to tell you, like, these are my experiences. This is what I've learned. If you feel depressed afterwards, like, yeah, that sucks, but this is real. This is like very real in your fucking face. And a lot of people think law enforcement can stop it, but man, like law enforcement can't be everywhere at once. I think it's a community effort.
What do you think of Sound of Freedom then? Do you know much about that film?
I know I read a lot about the gentleman that did that type of stuff. I'm trying to get tickets between here, Illinois, and Texas to see if I can, because it's just a 6-hour drive to go see it, but I'm not having any luck. But I do know someone that was involved with it. I can't name them because there's like NDAs and stuff that had to be signed for it. And I do know that the movie, from what I've seen and from what I've read and heard, right? The movie is really like, this is what it is, kind of like how I like to be on approach with it when people ask me about it, is like, this is what's happening. This is how it happens. This is how many times it's happened. This is what I did. This is like, because that's the thing, man, is it's really difficult to try to pinpoint things. But if you can give people information like, this is what I learned from this, and this is what I did. And from what I've seen enough clips of the movie to go, okay, like, this seems like something that I'm going to have to bite on, because it's refreshing to see. And this sounds really bad, but it's refreshing to see people going, oh, I definitely want to learn about that, because that's what you're going to do with the film, that's what it is. It's a learning experience. But man, it's hard to get tickets.
I'm trying not to cuss here, but it's so selfish, isn't it? The people, they want to legalize this stuff. Well, clearly they're only thinking of their own need, their own desires. They're not thinking of that young person. I mean, it's just insane. No, I was looking for a copy of it yesterday, actually. I wasn't sure if it was like they said it was going to stream online somewhere, and I just come up with all these spammy websites, so I gave it a miss. But I'm sure there'll be a copy flying around quite soon. So yeah, it was Tim Ballard, wasn't it? Started Operation Underground Railway. Was he a DEA agent or?
No, I think he was either Air Force or Homeland Security, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, Homeland Security. You're right. Yeah, and I think
it was one of those.
I think he worked in Colombia, didn't he? And he
worked. He
worked in a lot of places. But yeah, it's a bizarre one. Off the back of the whole, I don't want to say the letter, but folks, there's a letter in the alphabet that there was a big movement about a year ago, a couple of years ago. Donald Trump was the savior. They also call it 17. And one of their things was that there's a whole host of children in underground dungeons that I believe they call DUMS. And they said the Navy SEALs are just like ready to go in and rescue all these kids from the darkness. And I've just said to people, like, I really doubt very much as great as that. If the scenario is correct, as you're saying, it would be great. It would be great if our forces went and saved them. I said, but believe me, in the forces, I can tell you from the UK experience, they wouldn't even have a clue what you were talking about. They certainly wouldn't know about letters in the alphabet, and this, plus the fact, the military or order takers, they'll just do what they're told. And so, sorry, I'm sounding like I'm being dismissive. I'm not. I'm just
you're not being dismissive, brother. The thing is that when we're talking about the military, right? This is the problem with the military, is that when you have to take orders from basically, politicians and stuff like that, right? I don't know how it is in the UK, but those people are in your chain of command. And it's really difficult when you have to like disagree with basically the top dog, right? And then you also have to like obey orders so everybody else doesn't chew you out. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about organizations and stuff like that, one of the biggest issues is that we don't have people around us that like will call us out on our bullshit. And a lot of people just have a lot of like yes men and yes women around them. And I think that's partially part of the issue that we're seeing with the military everywhere, at least for the US, right? The other issue that we see with the military is we were at war for 20 years where we never found weapons of mass destruction. And We never found a bunch of other things. And then when we pulled out, we left millions of dollars in equipment that will probably make its way to the black market. But yet you expect a generation of people like me to tell their kids, absolutely go serve. It's a little difficult, man. It's a little difficult. So there's a lot of
Like, has there ever been a veteran that doesn't look back and think, "Oh my God, what the hell were we involved in?" I know there's some, because I know some that they wouldn't know what we were discussing now. It's just, you know,
Oh, you mean like looking back at it? I'm one of
yeah.
those.
I mean,
I look back and I go, the what the fuck was the point? But then because I was Pad Liberty was where you remember the video when we were pulling out of Iraq?
yeah.
That was the pad that I was in. That was where the airport was. It was Pad Liberty. And I remember seeing it and it just like went away. And then I remember seeing the videos because the way that you see a lot of this is on Snapchat. Snapchat, like everybody has Snapchat for some reason on their phones and they just post things all over the world. And that's where a lot of, from what I've learned from different intelligence agencies, is like that's one way that they can collect data. And you just saw like all of it on fire and like them doing whatever the fuck they wanted. And I'm like, oh, I just went down there to collect people's like DNA and retina. It's pretty much it. Like,
Yeah.
that was it. I obviously saved a couple villages and we helped a couple people, like we had a village that they had a guy that he would walk in and he'd grab like some random person, cut their head, and then put their hand on the deadless body and leave a handprint on a house. And he's like, if anybody comes in here and you help him, one of you's next. And we ended up pulling that guy out of that village. Like we caught him in the middle of the night sleeping, and he had like bomb making materials in the house and shit. And the next day we went in and the whole village was just fucking outside, like with music and shit. And we're like, oh fuck, these people are gonna kill us. No, they just wanted to thank us. They were like, oh my God, thank you. Like there was cool moments like that. But when you look at the overall, man, like we lost a lot of people. Like we lost a lot of people.
And just give your unit a shout so people at home. I know you're a military policeman.
Oh man. Yeah. Shout out to all the MPs that are still working and hating your life and hoping to God that your term ends. Just enjoy it. Just enjoy it, man. You don't have to hate your life in the military. My company was the 463rd MP. Their colors have now been closed, so that company is not in service right now. I was like 30 or 29 when I saw that happen, and I've never felt like a child because I cried when I saw them just put the colors away, and I was like, "Oh my God, that's history. I was a part of that. What is happening with my life?" But yeah, I'll shout out to all the MPs, man.
Rich, we got one last thing that I just want to run by you for your thoughts. I'm always trying to enlighten people as to the spiritual journey, because I think it's just the only thing to aspire to in life. It's the only thing that brings meaning to your life and makes it great. Cars are great, but they rust out, don't they? Houses are great, but then they end up needing lots of repair, and then you get kicked. Well, you get old and you got to leave your house anyway, and they put you in a. You've got a lot of people now that are aware of the issues that we've discussed. They seem to think that like the Navy SEALs are going to come out of nowhere and like put it all right, and they're going to take down the government and my thing is, like, if that happens, within 3 weeks, it will all be back the same as it was, with the same greed-driven people who live out of their ego. That even the ones that probably profess to care about the kids now will soon be in positions of power where they're like, we mentioned it earlier, they're just turning a blind eye to the reality of what's going on. And I just wanted to mention it before the podcast closed, because I think until as a humanity we understand there's some fundamental wrongs in this society, and they're creating monsters, not just monsters that do the stuff we've talked about, but just very lost people. It's like worked for a lot of charities, and all these charities started with good people wanting to do something good, right? And then when the donations started to come in, these good people just started not so much to want to do good, but to buy a bigger house and a nicer car. And suddenly, these charity folks are on £150,000, $200,000 salaries, and it just all becomes corrupt. And that's because I think we don't have the fun. We don't have the spiritual battle nailed from when we're born, because there's no one to teach it to us. There's no one to teach you that money and all this materialism and making profit off doing evil is just never going to make you happy. I just wondered if you had a view on that, Rich.
I think that the most important thing to understand is, if you ask anyone who's been to war how important religious is or religious beliefs are, they're pretty important, because when you're starting to go through shit, right, you start to hold on to your beliefs, right? I mean, look at Al-Qaeda, JAM, ISIS, and all these other organizations. It's all based upon what? A religious belief. So anyone with two brain cells can be like, yeah, religion's like a belief in something is really, really important, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to carry you when everything's going haywire. And a lot of times people might argue, well, I've been through haywire. And it's like, no, you're not understanding. Like, when you completely devote yourself to something, it's because you have the utmost confidence in what you're doing and that it's going to work. So I think religion is important, but I think the other thing that it's important is that to just sometimes understand that power reveals character. I think people say that struggles reveal your character. Yeah, to an extent, but I've seen people be put in a power position, from my small view of the world, and they just completely change. So I can only imagine what happens if you don't have a good circle of people around you that have good morals, and good morals, you can define whatever morals are to you. Like, I'm not here to give that explanation to people, but you have to like be able to like at some point understand that there's certain lines that you probably shouldn't cross. Because number one, the karma that'll come back from it will just be 10 times fold. And number two, because there's just certain things that we really shouldn't try to cross. Like when it comes to like doing things, and some people just don't have that. Like I told you in the beginning, the moment you realize that they look at human beings like cattle, you'll be able to understand like everything else that they do, and it wouldn't surprise you, because it's like, oh, okay, this is how you view people. I get how you view people. It's fucked up, and I hope to God you just fucking like just rot in a jail cell for 23 hours a day. But man, unfortunately, it takes everybody to be able to point out bullshit in order for everybody to make change, and change doesn't happen unless we all agree that we're going to make that change. But I think good times are coming, man. It's just a matter of people like yourself, and some people like me that want to bring out at least a little bit of information for you to like sit down, digest, and go, oh, okay, like this is real. Let me look into this. Let me learn about it. And it doesn't have to be through me. You could go watch a movie, you could go read a book. Like you can find a lot of information on this stuff. It's just be willing to accept like some of it is bullshit, some of it isn't. And that's just all there is, man. It's just community is big, community.
Absolutely. On that notion, brother, on behalf of our YouTube community, hopefully our joint community now that, and Rich, just stay on the line so I can thank you properly. But thanks so much for coming and sharing your story, and also enlightening us to a horrible side of life, unfortunately, but one that we all do need to be aware of. So thank you. I'm going to put all your links below. Your podcast is the Rico podcast, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Rico podcast, folks, you heard it. And on that note, just say massive thank you to you. Could you like and subscribe, friends? That would be really kind of you. Look after yourselves. Much love. See you soon. Thank you.